My wife said, "I'll be late, don't wait up." I just said, "Okay." Didn't think much of it at first, but something felt off. So I checked one small detail I'd ignored before. That's when I realized this wasn't just a late night. It was the end of a story I hadn't known I was living in, and the beginning of one I was going to finish entirely on my own terms. If you've ever had that specific feeling, not panic, not anger, just a quiet wrongness that settles in your chest and won't move, you already know exactly where this is going. Stay with me, because the details matter. And if you're new here, subscribe to Voxa Narrator right now. We tell these stories the way they actually happened. No sugarcoating, no performance, just the truth. Hit that button before we go further. I'm 38. I've been married for 6 years. We bought a house 4 years ago, the kind of house you buy when you're genuinely planning a future. Enough rooms for what comes next, a yard, a neighborhood that felt permanent. I work in project management, which means I spend my professional life tracking details, noticing when timelines don't add up, identifying the gap between what someone reports and what's actually happening. I'm good at it. It took me an embarrassingly long time to apply those same skills to my own home. My wife and I met when we were both in our early 30s, not young and reckless, old enough to know what we wanted, old enough to be deliberate about choosing each other. The first few years were solid in the way that things are solid when two people are genuinely compatible and both paying attention. We communicated well. We had our own lives and interests that intersected in the right places. I trusted her completely, which I want to say clearly, because trust isn't naivety. I had reasons for the trust, built over years, and those reasons are what made what I found so disorienting. The late night started about 4 months before the night that changed everything. Update 1. Her job had always had irregular hours. She worked in events coordination, which meant that certain seasons were brutal and certain periods were calm. Late nights during busy stretches were not unusual. I had never questioned them because they'd always made sense within the context of what she was working on. What changed around 4 months ago was the frequency and the pattern. The late nights started happening outside of busy seasons. She'd come home after 10 on a Tuesday in a relatively quiet month and explain it as a last-minute client thing, a planning session that ran long, a colleague who needed help with something urgent. Each individual explanation was plausible. Collectively, over several weeks, they formed a pattern that didn't quite fit the professional context she was providing. I didn't say anything initially because I'm not someone who raises alarms based on feelings alone. I need information. I observe, I collect, I assess. So I started paying closer attention, not checking her phone, not following her, nothing invasive, just paying attention to the texture of things. What I noticed, she was showering immediately upon coming home on the late nights, which she hadn't done before. She was quieter than usual in the evenings before she left, the specific quiet of someone carrying something they're concentrating on not showing. Her stories about work, when she told them, had become slightly less specific. Fewer names, fewer details, more vague references to a thing we were dealing with rather than the granular work storytelling she'd always done. I noticed all of this, and I said nothing. I was still in the phase of hoping I was wrong. Then came the Tuesday she sent the text. It was 6:47 p.m. I was home, had made dinner, was expecting her around 7:30 based on nothing in particular, just habit. The text said, "Going to be late tonight. Work thing ran into something. Don't wait up, I'll be quiet when I come in." I said, "Okay, I'll leave something in the fridge." She said, "You're the best." I ate dinner alone. I watched something on television. I went to bed at 10:30, but I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, and the wrongness I'd been carrying for weeks was louder than usual, and at some point around 11, I picked up my phone and I checked one thing. Update 2. The thing I checked was the location. We had shared location access on our phones, not for surveillance, just practical. It had been set up years ago for the kind of mundane reasons couples do it. Knowing when someone is almost home so you can time dinner, finding each other in crowded places, the casual convenience of it. I had never used it to check on her, not once in 6 years. The night I did, I wasn't even certain I was going to look at the result. I picked up the phone with the vague intention of checking and then found I was actually looking. She was not at her office. I want to be precise about my reaction because I think accuracy matters here. It was not a wave of emotion. It was a very specific, very contained feeling, like a small clean break inside something structural. Not the collapse, just the fracture that precedes it. I put the phone down. I looked at the ceiling. I picked it up again and looked at the location again, thinking maybe I'd misread it or the GPS had placed her incorrectly. Same location. A residential address about 20 minutes from our house, in a part of the city I had no particular associations with. I put the phone down. I thought about what I was going to do. I am a project manager by profession. When I encounter a problem, my first instinct is not to react, but to understand the full scope before determining the response. So I didn't call her. I didn't text. I noted the address, and I set my phone down, and I lay in the dark, and I waited. She came home at 1:24 a.m. I heard her come in, heard her move quietly through the house the way she'd said she would. She came to bed in the dark, carefully, trying not to wake me. I was not asleep. I said nothing. In the morning, I acted completely normal. Made coffee, asked about her night, said I'd slept fine. She said the work thing had gone very late, that she was exhausted, that she was sorry for the hour. I said don't worry about it. I went to work and I ran the address. Update 3. It took me about 20 minutes to identify whose address it was. Public records, some cross-referencing, nothing sophisticated. The address belonged to a man. Someone I would later confirm through other means was someone she had known before me. Not an ex in the formal sense, but someone from her past who had overlapped with her life at various points over the years. Someone whose name I had heard maybe twice in our entire relationship, mentioned briefly, filed away as inconsequential. I sat at my desk for a long time after I found that. I want to be honest about the next few days because I think the honesty is the important part. I did not confront her immediately. I did not break down. I did not make any visible change to my behavior at home. What I did was spend 3 days being very quiet inside my own head while running through everything I knew, everything I'd noticed, everything that had accumulated over 4 months and now had a different meaning. I thought about the showers. I thought about the vague work stories. I thought about the specific texture of her quietness before she left on the late nights. I thought about the way she'd said, "You're the best," after I'd told her I'd leave dinner in the fridge, and what it cost someone to send a message like that in the middle of something like that. On the 3rd day, I came home, and I sat across from her at dinner, and I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." She put her fork down. Something moved across her face. Not guilt exactly, more like preparation. Like she'd been anticipating this and was now settling into a version of herself she'd rehearsed. She said, "Okay." I said, "Where were you on Tuesday night?" Update 4. The pause before she answered was 4 seconds. I counted them, not deliberately, just because the silence had a texture to it that made the seconds distinct. She said, "At work, I told you. It ran late." I said, "You weren't at work." Another pause. "What do you mean?" "I checked the location. You were at a residential address 20 minutes from here. I've identified whose address it is. I know you have a history with him. I'm giving you the opportunity right now to tell me the truth." She went very still. The preparation she'd settled into came apart. What was underneath it was something rawer. Not guilt performing itself dramatically, just a person who had been caught and was now recalculating. She said, "How long have you known?" I said, "I've been paying attention for 4 months. I confirmed the location 3 days ago." She said, "Why didn't you say anything?" I said, "Because I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I said anything, and I needed to see what you would do when you thought I didn't know." She looked at the table. She said, "It's not what you think." I said, "Tell me what it is then." What followed was a conversation that lasted almost 2 hours, and which I am going to summarize because the specific content is less important than the shape of it. She had reconnected with him several months ago through a mutual contact. What had started as occasional messages had developed into something she described as emotionally significant, and the late nights were what they appeared to be. She had been spending them with him, at his place consistently, for approximately 9 weeks. She said she hadn't meant for it to happen. She said she was confused. She said she still loved me. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she was finished, I said, "I appreciate you telling me the truth. That's actually the first honest thing that's happened in 4 months, so I want to acknowledge it." She flinched at that. I said, "I'm going to need you to go stay somewhere else for a few days. I need to think." She said, "Are you ending this?" I said, "I don't make decisions in the middle of conversations. I'll let you know." She left that night to stay with her sister. I sat in the house we'd bought 4 years ago, enough rooms for what comes next, a yard, a neighborhood that felt permanent. And I thought about what comes next. Update 5. I spent 4 days alone in that house. I talked to my brother on day 2. He's the person I trust most in my life, and he listened without offering opinions I hadn't asked for, which is the particular skill of someone who has known you long enough to understand what you actually need. I didn't want to be told what to do. I wanted to hear myself talk through it out loud to someone I trusted and figure out where I landed. I also talked to someone professionally, a therapist I'd seen briefly a few years ago for a work-related stress period. I called and got an appointment within 2 days. I want to mention this because I think it's the part of these situations that doesn't get talked about enough. Sitting with something this size alone inside your head is not productive. Getting it out of your head and into a structured conversation with someone trained to help you think is productive. I recommend it without reservation. By day 4, I knew what I wanted. Not because someone told me, not because I'd reached some emotional resolution, but because I'd thought it through completely enough that the answer had settled into clarity. She came back on day 5. She sat across from me in the living room, not at the dining table. The living room, which felt less formal and also less like a negotiation table. She looked like someone who had been hoping but wasn't certain. I said, "I've thought about this carefully. I want to be honest with you about where I've landed." She said, "Okay." I said, "I'm filing for divorce." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Is there anything?" I said, "I want to be clear that this isn't a negotiating position. I'm not saying it to get a reaction or to apply pressure. I've thought about it for 4 days, and this is my decision." She said, "I made a terrible mistake." I said, "Yes, but the mistake I keep coming back to isn't just what you did. It's the 4 months of active deception, the showers, the vague stories, the 'you're the best' text while you were at his address. I could potentially have processed the thing itself with enough time. What I can't build on is the architecture of deception that surrounded it. That was careful and sustained, and it tells me something about what you're capable of that I can't unknow." She cried. I stayed present. I got her water, which is a small thing but felt like the right thing. When she was steadier, I said, "I don't hate you. I don't want bad things for you. But I'm not able to stay in this marriage, and I think somewhere in yourself you already knew that was a possible outcome when you made the choices you made." She left an hour later. Final update. That was 14 weeks ago. The process is underway. Legal things take the time they take, and we are being civil about it, which I credit to both of us for managing an inherently painful process without letting it become ugly. The house is going to be sold. We've agreed on the practical things without significant conflict, which I think reflects that we are both, at our cores, reasonable people who made a reasonable life together until it stopped being reasonable. I've been staying in the house through the process. I've been working, seeing my brother, continuing the therapy which has been genuinely useful beyond just the immediate situation. I've been sleeping adequately, which surprised me. I expected the aftermath to be louder, and it has been quieter than I anticipated. Not easy, but quiet. The man she had been seeing, I have no information about what happened there, and I made a decision early on not to seek it. That situation is not my story to follow. What happened on that end, how it resolved or didn't, tells me nothing useful about my own life going forward. What I know, 14 weeks out, is that I trusted correctly for 6 years and then continued to trust past the point where the evidence justified it. That's not a character flaw. It's what trust looks like when it's real. Real trust doesn't evaporate at the first sign of irregularity. It holds until the information is undeniable. Mine held until I checked one location on one late Tuesday night and saw an address I didn't recognize. I don't regret the 6 years. I don't regret the house, the plans, the belief in what we were building. I regret that it ended this way, but I don't regret having believed in it. That's the thing I've had to work hardest to hold on to. The belief that trusting someone completely is not the error. The error was hers. My trust was correct until it wasn't, and that's different from having been foolish. She said, "Don't wait up." I didn't wait up. I just paid attention. It turns out those are different things too. I want to stop here and ask you something directly, because this one is heavy and I know you have thoughts. If you were in this situation, if you checked that location and saw that address, what would your first move have been? Would you have confronted immediately or done what he did and waited to collect the full picture first? Drop your honest answer in the comments right now. This community always brings real perspective, and I want to hear yours. And before you go, you decide what story comes next. Leave a comment below and tell me what you want to hear. A betrayal that unraveled in public? A quiet revenge that took months to land? A moment where the person everyone underestimated finally showed exactly who they were? Tell me what you need to hear, and the most requested story becomes the next upload. Drop it below.